When I was in 5th grade, my class went on a trip to West Texas. And on that trip, we stayed at a ranch that was out that way somewhere, and we went to the McDonald Observatory. Anybody been there before? Dark skies. It's a great spot if you ever get a chance to drive out that way. And we spent some time wandering around like a state park out there that was out in the desert somewhere. And that last activity was particularly exciting because I was part of a group of 5th grade boys who managed to get ourselves separated off from the rest of the group. I know that's hard for you to imagine that I was one of the mischievous ones, but I was. We got ourselves separated off from the rest of the group, so you can imagine this scenario, a group of 7 or 8 boys wandering the hiking trails of this state park, each carrying just a little plastic bottle of water. We were having a whale of a time. We were so excited to be unsupervised and out there in the wilderness. And then all of a sudden, the sun started beating down a little hotter. The water started to run a little low, and we realized we didn't know how to get back to the center where we were supposed to meet everybody. And we were all of a sudden very uncertain. How do we get out of here? And suddenly I can remember that there was a turn in the mood of the group as we recognized, the 7 or 8 boys, we were lost, hopelessly lost in this wilderness. Obviously we got out, otherwise I would still be there, living in the desert somewhere. In fact, looking back, I'm fairly certain that we were never more than maybe a mile from the center where we were supposed to be, and we probably didn't spend more than about 2 hours out there at maximum. But for 5th grade Tim, it was a harrowing experience of being lost and alone in the wilderness. Today, we are exploring the story of a biblical hero who was also out in the wilderness having a harrowing time of his own as we continue our sermon series, Epic Meltdowns of the Bible. Today we're exploring a story about the prophet Elijah. Talked about Elijah a couple times in the last few weeks. Elijah was a prophet in the ancient kingdom of Israel. And our story today is a turning point in his life and his career as a prophet. It's an important story for Elijah. It represents a low point for him and a point from which he goes up and up to greater things. For us today, I believe this story offers us hope for when we are stuck in the wilderness and gives us a call for when we feel ourselves right at home. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I forgot that it's not on those screens. It's just behind me. Our story today comes from the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19. I know it says verses 1 through 18, but we're not going to read all of verses 1 through 18 because I want to have lunch on time, and it's a long story. So we're going to read a few verses at a time. We're going to go through this bit by bit, but we're not going to get all the way to 18. I'm going to talk through the remainder of it in a minute. Starting with verse 1, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. I want to stop us right there right away and give us some background. 1 Kings is a book about the divided kingdom that split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah following the reign of King Solomon. You may have heard of him. He was supposed to be very wise. I'm not so sure sometimes, but there you go. Elijah was a prophet working in the northern kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Ahab. Look at my laser pointer. That's fun. King Ahab. King Ahab is described as very bad according to 1 Kings. Ahab had a close relationship to the Babylonians and some other large powers at the time, including through his marriage to the princess Jezebel, whose name is also in this scripture. This close relationship meant that in addition to the priests and prophets of Adonai, of God, that would have been in Ahab's court, he also had prophets and priests of Baal there in his court. Elijah had prophesied before our text today against the presence of the prophets of Baal in the court of Ahab. And in chapter 18, the chapter before today, we see the conflict between Elijah and these prophets come to a head as they engage in a little altar-off, a little face-off over whose God is better. So in this story, you may have heard this before, the prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, construct one altar, and Elijah constructs his own, and then each prays, and whosever altar gets lit on fire without them lighting it, right? That's the key point. Without them lighting it, their God is in charge. And Elijah's altar lights without him lighting it, and the prophets of Baal can't get their altar to light up. So as you might imagine, Elijah wins the altar off, and his celebration, his touchdown dance for winning the altar off, was to kill all the prophets of Baal. He did that because the prophets of Baal had killed prophets of Israel before. Violence begets violence, as they say. So that's what verse 1 means, is what it is referencing when it says how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Quite a touchdown dance. So following this, we see Elijah's story continues with more violence. Verse 2, then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Here we see the problem. If we go back one slide, we see the problem. Jezebel has said, so may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow, which is fancy language for I'm going to kill you in the next 24 hours, Elijah. I'm coming for you. Violence begets violence. So Elijah runs. He heads south from where he is to a place called Beersheba, that's still a city today, in the southern portion of modern-day Israel, in the desert called the Negev. 1 Kings reminds us here that Beersheba at this time is in the kingdom of Judah. The reason they do that is it is telling us that it is outside of Ahab and Jezebel's authority. Elijah should be safe there, but he doesn't stay. Instead, he leaves, and he continues another day into the wilderness, where he finds a nice tree to sit under, and there he calls out to God, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Meltdown. A meltdown he has out here under the broom tree, and not for no reason. I mean, Elijah's in a tough spot here. He's in a hard way. He has drawn the ire of the political powers of his day. He's had to flee for his life to a foreign land, a place where he really doesn't belong. From there, he has found his way deep into the wilderness. And having been to this part of the world before, I can tell you, it is a rough wilderness to be in. It's desert, and it is dry, rolling hills with scrubby bushes and low trees that are broken up only by the occasional rock formation. It's kind of like the panhandle of Texas in some ways. Today, highways and other roads break up the landscape, but in the ancient world, it was empty. And here we also glimpse Elijah's inner thoughts, his considerations of his own situation. I am no better than my ancestors. Which is an interesting line from Elijah. We don't really get an idea of which ancestors he's referring to here, because he has quite a few that he could point to. Some scholars posit that he's referring to his actual ancestors, his mom, dad, his grandparents, and so on, who have already died, so he wants to be like them. Others say maybe he's referring to his prophetic ancestors, like Moses, who in Numbers similarly complains in the wilderness. Or maybe he means his Israelite ancestors who wandered the desert for 40 years in the book of Exodus, and then on the cusp of entering the promised land, turned back, decided they were too afraid and didn't go in. Whichever meaning is the closest, the point is the same. Elijah is at the end of his rope. He's in the wilderness, literally and figuratively. He is afraid, empty, alone, and exhausted. you ever felt this way before? Maybe you've never felt literally lost in the wilderness like 5th grade Tim. But I would bet that each of us has had a time in our lives where we have found ourselves in a figurative wilderness. Times where life is just so hard, where it is easy to feel afraid, where nothing we do seems to matter very much. The emptiness just seems to continue. Times where we feel stranded and stuck and alone. Times where we feel completely spent and exhausted. Maybe you find yourself in this kind of space today. It's understandable. When we look around and take stock of the world, it's hard not to feel exhausted. Wars, famines, violence, death, all things that have become so normalized they barely manage to crack the news anymore. Not to mention the political divisions that we continue to experience here in our country, divisions that are so deep it seems impossible to interact with someone on the, quote, other side. And then stack on top of all of that that's just kind of been simmering, the tragedy of the floods in the hill country, with hundreds of precious lives lost. And I've noticed as we get further in time from that event itself, more and more speculation has come out. Could this or that have been done better? And none of that speculation fixes what's happened. And from what I've seen so far, it only serves to deepen our dividedness. But all of that is out there stuff that's happening kind of somewhere else, even if the hill country feels close to home. On top of that stuff, there's also in here stuff. The stuff that's going on in your life, in my life, in our lives together. Things that we may or may not share with others. The pile of bills that never seems to get any smaller. The words the doctor said that keep echoing and repeating over and over again at diagnosis. The relationships that fell apart, the people, family even, that we no longer speak to, the death of a loved one, the one who might have been our biggest support when we find ourselves in the wilderness. The combined weight of 1,000 responsibilities of kids and school and work and exercise and socializing and caregiving and love another person. And the list goes on and on and on. That combined weight can sit so heavy on our hearts and our minds that even in the midst of the good things in life, in the midst of the good times, we can find ourselves in the wilderness. Afraid, alone, exhausted. What do we do in our wilderness times? How do we move forward? When the journey seems too big, when the wilderness is too vast, when we are too exhausted, too alone, too afraid, how do we take the next step? Elijah's story offers us an answer. As Elijah is under this broom tree sleeping, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." Sometimes when we are in the depths of despair, lost in the deepest wilderness, unsure of where to go or what to do next, a good first place to start is a snack and a nap. Me too. It's true. Sometimes what we need is the reset that can come from setting aside distractions to eat and to rest. But the story also goes deeper than that. These words here, stones and jar, are pretty rare words in the Hebrew, not ones that get used all the time. Stones here is the same root word that we see in Isaiah 6 and 7. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out." In this text, Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, is receiving his prophetic call and feels himself unworthy of it, and this live coal is one of the things that is used to help him recognize his worthiness. Stones and coal share a root word in Hebrew here. The word jar is rare too. But one of the places that it shows up is 2 chapters before our text today when Elijah meets the widow of Zarephath. Another time that Elijah is on the run in his story. He goes to the town of Zarephath and meets a widow who is on the very last of her food, including the final drops of oil in a jug. Her plan is to use those drops of oil and a little bit of wheat that she has to make the last loaf of bread for her son before they eat it and then die of starvation together. Elijah asked her to prepare a small cake for him first and then go and make that loaf of bread. And she does so, and afterward, her jug of oil and her jar of wheat never run empty. In that story, the word jug is the same word as our word jar here. Jug and jar. What does all this mean, Tim? Glad you asked. Great question. These are rare words, but the few times that they appear, they have to do with provisions offered to a prophet who felt unworthy and given in times of emptiness and lack. So here in our text, they point to the provisions God gives to Elijah when he feels unworthy, alone, and empty. And those provisions, combined with his rest, turn the journey will be too much for you into he got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. 40 days and 40 nights is Old Testament talk for a very, very long time. A little food and rest, meeting the simplest of needs, was all it took for Elijah's wilderness experience, his stuckness, his loneliness, his emptiness, to turn into a very, very long journey across the desert to this cave on Mount Horeb. With a snack and a nap, Elijah went from standing still to moving forward. And this cave is significant. In Hebrew, it is not a cave, it is the cave. And the cave on Mount Horeb must be where Moses met God in the cleft of the rock in Exodus. If we continued to read until verse 18, we would find that Elijah meets God here too, as Linda alluded to in our children's time this morning. And there he hears God not in a fire, not in a storm, but in the sound of hushed silence and a small voice that calls out to him. Many of you may know that I enjoy doing triathlons as a hobby. One of the lessons you begin learning early on in the sport of triathlon and in endurance sports generally is the importance of nutrition, eating things while you are racing when you're going a long way. As you graduate to longer and longer races, you begin to look at more ways to take in food and hydration during a race. And during my first half Ironman, I learned these lessons the hard way. I skipped an aid station on the second half of the bike leg of that triathlon, and so I ran out of water before the next one, and I finished the bike so dehydrated that I could barely walk in a straight line. I did a lot of walking to get to the finish line of that race and a lot of stopping. The lesson I learned was don't skip the aid station. Get the water before you need it. I believe that this text has 2 distinct calls for us that show up at different times in our lives, and the first has to do with that aid station. When we find ourselves in wilderness times, we must look for the food that is being provided to us and take it. Now, for us, that food, those provisions might be, like our wilderness times, they might be figurative. We might not really need actual food and provisions. We might have those, but we might need spiritual provisions. And if so, I have a hunch that those provisions look like 2 things for us. One is community, and the other is prayer. Prayer is an opportunity for us to unload the weights that we carry, to put them on the shoulders of a God who is big enough to carry it all, to allow ourselves to fully release our struggles. I don't mean that prayer is an immediate fix-all, but it is a powerful tool for connecting us to a God who loves us, and for beginning to speak aloud the burdens that we carry, which are so much heavier when we carry them in silence. Prayer is like rest. It can lighten and recharge us so that we are ready to journey again. Community, on the other hand, can be a little tiring at times, especially for introverts like myself. But ultimately, community is the place where we find the nourishment that we need to step forward through the wilderness to our Mount Horeb and beyond it, back to the work of God in the world. When we bring our burdens to our community, we learn that we do not carry these things alone. We discover that others have carried similar burdens, a gift in times of our emptiness. And the second call this text has for us is when we are in times of plenty. When we feel ourselves on the other side of a wilderness times, when we feel like we are right at home, like we are in a good spot. In these times, we are called to be the providers of food for the journeys that others are making. We know that the reality of life is that we will each find ourselves in the wilderness, facing a journey that feels too big, looking at an empty tank and feeling utterly alone. When we are not in those times, we are called to be the people who make the bread, who offer the space for rest, who make it possible for others to take the next step forward on their journey. Sometimes it looks like literally providing food and meeting material needs. Sometimes it might just be a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a safe person to be quiet alongside. There are many Elijahs in the world, my friends, facing the wilderness journeys of life. How can we be God's hands and feet, providing food and rest to them when they need it? Wherever you find yourself today, I hope you will hear this. The wilderness is not forever. It might feel big and empty. The journey might seem like it will never end, but there is hope. God walks alongside us, lays down with us when we get too tired to walk further. God works through our community to provide and nurture us as we journey through the figurative wilderness of our lives. And God works through us to provide for others as they walk their own journeys. This week,